Hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets across Egypt over the military's actions that were decried by Morsi's supporters as a coup and celebrated as a correction by his opponents. At least 8 people are dead so far, more than 340 wounded in sporadic violence that at times pitted Morsi's supporters against the opposition and the military. Here to talk about that and much more tonight is our Webster Tarpley. Once a month and sometimes more, he is with us to share his insight and his wisdom, and he is standing by right now. Hello, Webster.
Hello.
Well? Well? Okay, good. I like that. That laugh sums it all up. It's that the world is nuts. Go ahead.
Why don't we... This has been a very busy month. We would have to do justice to the defeat of the death squads in Syria at Qusair on June 5th. We would have to deal with the CIA provocateur and triple agent known as Snowden, who's in the great tradition of Ellsberg and Assange. He's a cognitive infiltration operation, quite possibly run by Cass Sunstein and Samantha Power.
Well, those are two names that would certainly, if you were going in that direction, be right at the top of the list. I agree with you.
And the goal of Snowden, it seems to me, is to weaken Obama and isolate him to the point where he will have to cave in and start the big bombing of Syria, which is what the British, the French, the Israelis, the neocons, and John Kerry all want. And we'll have to deal with the coup d'etat, the attempted overthrow of the U.S. government, essentially, on the afternoon of June 12th by John Forbes Kerry of Skull and Bones, who tried to use a meeting of the Principals Committee to ram through the immediate bombing of Serbia. That's something that Kissinger had...
you mean Syria. Syria.
Of Syria, yes.
Yeah, you said Serbia.
I'm sorry, Serbia, yeah. It's the idea. Bombing Syria now is similar to what Kissinger was able to do in October 1973, put the U.S. on worldwide nuclear alert while Nixon slept, didn't ask Nixon. And the Serbia was, of course, Al Gore in March of 1999, ordering the bombing of Serbia without reference to Clinton in order to stop Yevgeny Primakov and his peace solution from coming across the Atlantic. But since today is the day of Egypt, we'll focus on Egypt.
Okay.
You have to understand what the Muslim Brotherhood is. They are the 1%, or at least the 3%, right? They're wealthy people. They are businessmen, doctors, lawyers, professors, editors. It's an elite group. It's an oligarchy. And they're
different. As you know, Webster, let me point this out to our listeners quickly. The Muslim Brotherhood has so-called chapters in most Arab countries, probably all of them, and they're different in every country. This is not a cohesive organization. Go ahead.
Although founded by the British intelligence in Egypt in the 1920s as a means to combat the growing nationalism of the Waft Party, and then used massively by the British to sabotage a truly great man, President Nasser of Egypt in the 1950s. So they have a very slimy record, especially in Egypt. But what these wealthy businessmen do, because that's who they are, is they use cultural populism in the same way that a Republican would here. In other words, they say, "Oh, we represent Islamic values." Right? And so forth. Right. But what they also do that a Republican won't do is they do this sort of social solidarity work. They do have hospitals. They do have community centers. They do offer charity. But, of course, that population is more impoverished than this, right? In Egypt, you have, a third to a half are living on less than $2 a day. So
something like that. Ties to the CIA, Webster?
Well, of course, there's been an obvious worldwide deal between the CIA and the Muslim Brotherhood since the beginning of 2011 at the latest, but this goes way back. The head of the Muslim Brotherhood was hosted at the White House by President Eisenhower back in the 1950s to celebrate what a great anti-Nasser operation this was. And we did have in the spring of 2012, wasn't it? I think it's about March of last year. We had representatives of the Muslim Brotherhood come to Washington, and they were given visas, and they were taken around. All right. So the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the advantage of the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, was that they weren't part of Mubarak. They were not part of the regime. You couldn't blame them for any of that. So they were free to view with alarm, right? They could say, this is terrible, corrupt, and all this other stuff. And they had no governing responsibility. So they had this tremendous advantage when they went into it. However, as soon as they took power, then they were expected to provide solutions. And this is exactly where they have failed, right? They're greedy for power. They're all the things that we've seen. They said that they would not have a presidential candidate, but then they did. And there were a million other things that they said they would do. And most important is this. Their campaign said, we will raise the standard of living of the Falachin, the Egyptian peasants and the Egyptian workers and those who have been excluded. We will raise your standard of living. And they made this appear to gullible people as if it were mainly a matter of corruption. And it was that the elite was stealing the money that should have gone to the people, whereas, of course, in reality, it's a matter of production, that there's not enough production to give everybody a decent outlook on life.
Correct. Well, we have the same problem here.
Yes, and it's demagogy. But, of course, there is corruption, of course, right, which is it's more of a political, social, cultural problem, right?
Well, when the Brotherhood was in
D.C. But hang on.
Yeah.
Here's the big thing, that they promised to raise the standard of living. And as soon as they got into power last summer, they began negotiations with the International Monetary Fund. And this is the main thing to understand. They threw away their chance to govern because they caved in to the IMF worse than any government in recent Egyptian history. The IMF has always targeted the system of subsidies, right? Going back to Nasser and Arab socialism, there's a bread subsidy, there's a cooking oil subsidy, there are other staples, there may be a rice subsidy, but it's wheat in particular, and fuel, household fuel or gasoline. And the demand of the IMF was, we'll give you a loan of $4 billion if you sign a letter of intent that specifies conditionalities. What are the conditionalities? That you will immediately double the price of gasoline. That happened last November. And really, it's been a slide downhill for Morsi since that moment. In other words, he doubled the price of gasoline. Think of that. I think any country in the world, you'll get riots, right?
That's suicide,
and in Egypt, there's a tradition. It goes back in particular, 1977, Sadat tried to tamper with the bread subsidy, and the whole country exploded in his face, and he backed off, and he never tried that again. One of the important factors in the entire color revolution, Arab Spring situation, be it Tunisia or Gaddafi or others, is that these governments were weakened in advance. They were set up for destruction by a years-long IMF offensive to try to attack the systems of subsidies and other government interventions to maintain the standard of living. And it was always the character of these things is to put a floor under the very poor. So the IMF was attacking this. And what Morsi accepted to do was to double the price of gasoline, to raise the sales tax, and to move towards the implementation of a value-added tax, which would be 10, 15, 20%
Oh, really? On
sales
top of
tax.
the sale?
Yeah.
Wow.
That was last November.
Wow.
That's part of the conditionalities. This is what destroyed him. So the big lesson to governments around the world, don't go for austerity. You will destroy yourself. Austerity kills. Austerity is futile. It's also suicidal for those that impose it.
Very good. All right, we have a break here. It was, as Webster said, a year ago last spring in April when the Muslim Brotherhood sent a delegation to Obama's Washington, and they said, we are here to start building bridges of understanding with the United States.
Bad idea.
We acknowledge the very important role of the United States in the world, and we would like our relations with the United States to be better than before. Gobbledygook. Be right back. Hang on. Okay, back with Webster, who is nailing it down very well. I can't even believe a national sales tax hike and a VAT on top of that. That is really
Jeff,
begging for it.
The idea was that the high sales tax would morph into a value-added tax, which would probably be higher. It's in the nature of things.
Always does. It grows and grows.
The idea being that instead of honoring the promise to do something about the standard of living of poor people, he was going for regressive taxation, because that's what these things are, right? What he needed was progressive taxation. Let me cite the great Hamdeen Sabbahi. Hamdeen Sabbahi is the guy who could lead Egypt out of this crisis. He is a Nasserist in our time. And Hamdeen Sabbahi has proposed a progressive tax. And he said, let's have a 10% property tax. In other words, a tax on all assets.
10% per year. 10%.
No. A one-time 10% called the Tahrir tax.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
Launch the new freedom
the new order
regime, right?
The new order.
That's a progressive tax.
Yeah.
And that make at that point also then you know who's a tax evader and who's not, because you can see what they've done. It has all sorts of possibilities. But what Morsi went with was regressive taxation, and this simply meant that the main promise of the Muslim Brotherhood did not say vote for us and we'll harass women or we'll take your booze away. No, they said we will raise the standard of living of the poorest peasants and workers and unemployed and other people in this lumpen proletariat in this entire society. And then they go around, they make a dirty deal with the International Monetary Fund, and they go for regressive taxation, and they actually lower the standard of living, right? And then they're probably in the process now of stealing a lot of this $5 billion or so IMF loan, although it's paid out in tranches.
Theft is a way of life, right?
Yeah, but the Muslim Brotherhood, again, what they show is a colossal ineptitude. In other words, an unwillingness even to do the proper window dressing that a normal demagogue would. Because remember, they'd been in the opposition for 70 years, I guess, and then they get power, and they try to take all power. They try to seize every branch of government. They rewrite the Constitution. The call today that the Constitution is somehow sacred, this is a joke, because Morsi himself gets into power, and then in November, December, he says, guess what, I'm expanding my own powers with the so-called constitutional decree. So the thing that got him on the skids is the International Monetary Fund, and I repeat this as a terrible lesson for every government in the world. If you embrace the IMF, that is the kiss of death. You are gone, finished. Ask Gaddafi, ask Ben Ali, ask Morsi. Now, a little bit more recently, we have this problem of the growing Islamism, the radicalism of the, frankly, Sunni Muslim Brotherhood, which somehow there's been a shift from Saudi sponsorship to Qatar sponsorship, or gutter sponsorship, we might well say. And this took a couple of forms. One is just a complete political imbecility. For example, tourism is, of course, big industry in Egypt, right? You can't build the future of Egypt on tourism, but you don't want to sabotage it either, right?
No, it's huge. Yeah,
it can contribute a lot. Although again, it's not the basis of your 5-year plan. Anyway, you may remember 15 years ago there was a group called Gama Islamiyah, and their big thing was they didn't want infidels coming into Egypt as tourists. So what they did was they got a commando and they went to the pyramids at Luxor, and they must have killed 60 or 70.
It was a slaughter.
Tourists.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, the head of that group is this character. Let's see, what's his name? Khaib, I think his name is. Anyway, the terrorist, the retired terrorist, the veteran leader of this monstrous massacre, Khayat. He was made the governor of Luxor province, where the pyramids are, by Morsi about 2 weeks ago. So you can imagine you're a tourist and you go to see the pyramids, you can say, oh, I'm so happy, my security is in good hands.
Great.
It's Comrade El Khayat who
talk about
killed all the tourists
black
15
humor.
years ago. But now, let's get serious, grave as that is. One of the other things that has brought down Morsi, and I'm very glad to say this, is the shift in the Syrian war. And this is a colossal event. This is a real world historical event at the beginning of June. And we wouldn't want to lose sight of that, even in light of these Egyptian events, which are very big in themselves. On the 5th of June, you had the fall of the city of Qusair. This was the number one fortress citadel of the Al-Qaeda terrorist death squads deployed by NATO and with the goal of
trained by the U.S., funded by all the Western great powers.
By all of them, the Israelis, every dirty force in the world has its support going for these death squads.
Yeah.
But they were defeated, and it was a rout. And it's a Stalingrad because they were encircled and wiped out. That Qusair battle has killed more terrorists than the U.S. could kill in hundreds of years with drones. Right? These were terrorists, and a lot of them were just mowed down.
Thank you for calling them terrorists. You know, I'm so sick of this crap, rebels. God, it's disgusting.
No, they're terrorists.
Of course they are.
But it's like the Falaise breakout of 1944 in the sense that it's not like the rebels fall back, the terrorists fall back to nearby positions. No, they're forced all the way north to Aleppo, and they may hold on to certain neighborhoods in Homs, but otherwise the entire southern and central part of Syria is now being mopped up by the Syrian army, by Hezbollah, and probably by Iranian forces as well. And this salient fact has had tremendous repercussions all over the world. In Turkey, the government of Erdogan, already shaken by this Spark rebellion among the golden youth of Istanbul, the main thing that went on in Turkey was that for months there were demonstrations of people in southern Turkey saying, we're sick of all these terrorists coming through here and harassing us. We want the terrorists out. So right now the saying is that Erdogan of Turkey is competing with Obama in his ability to lead from behind. Erdogan has pulled in his horns. He doesn't want to be the spear point of the attack on Syria anymore.
Right. No.
He's running for cover. So that's a big thing.
Well, he remembers Gaddafi's unseemly end, I think. No pun intended.
Maybe we could find a better comparison.
All right. Well, anyway. All right, good. Excellent analysis with Webster, and we'll do more right after the bottom of the hour break. Glad you're along tonight. Stay right there. Okay, let's get right back to Webster and our analysis of the coup in Egypt. All right, my friend, onward.
So going back to this Qusair decisive battle, on June 5th was the end of it, right? The day that the Syrian army flag went up on the clock tower in Qusair was a great day, and it has... How many
of the terrorist scum were killed? Do we have any idea?
I don't think there were any estimates of that, because Syria is not going to trumpet that, and this observatory in Coventry, England, is could
have been 5,000 dead. We don't know.
It's hard to say, right? But it's a very large part of the terrorist population of the world has concentrated itself in Syria.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah,
it's true. So as a result of this, Turkey has had a kind of an upheaval. Erdogan is now frightened. He doesn't want to be out in front on this. He's pulling back. In Jordan, the monarchy is terrified. They want the U.S. to stay there with planes and Patriots and some Marines.
And yet they're letting special forces train these terrorists on their soil, so they should be scared.
And it's not working, though. That's the point. It's not working because these moderate terrorists, right, or moderate cannibals, as we can call them, they're not faring too well, right? This was when Cameron met with Putin. Putin said, you people are funding cannibals who cut people open and eat their internal organs on TV. Is this the heritage of hundreds of years of European civilization? Good point. Right? Shocking to Cameron.
Yeah.
All right. In Gaza, right, Hamas has split into two parts because Hezbollah and Iran are so obviously now in the fight on the side of Syria. There's a split between the scummy faction, the sellout faction, which is continuing to condemn Assad, but the military faction of Hamas says we value Hezbollah and Iran, and we're not interested in interfering in Syria. Also, the fact that the emir of Qatar has abdicated, this may have something to do with
when did that happen? I missed that.
A couple of weeks ago. The manifest failure of his policy, right, to bring in the younger guy, because the old guy had been very, very adventurous and very, very foolish. The the big shift, though, was in London and Paris, because you have Cameron and Hague, the foreign secretary in London,
dirtbags,
and
both of them,
and Fabius in Paris.
Yeah.
And they start screaming to Obama, "You must attack Syria now, because our entire terrorist army is now threatened with annihilation over the next several months. We demand that you attack."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very happy to say that the answer from Obama has been no. It has been stalling.
Mm-hmm.
It's been tergiversation, right?
Mm-hmm. Good word.
It's been reluctant. It's been, evasive action.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you want. But this, in today's world, this is a great boon. But it is also important to see that on the same day, the London Guardian publishes Glenn Greenwald and Snowden on the NSA.
And goodbye Syria from the news. Right.
And it's even more insidious. That's part of it. But part of it is to weaken Obama. In other words, the waves of things go, Obama taps your phone. Obama reads your email. Well, we know about Echelon. We know about Trailblazer. We know about warrantless wiretap. We know about Carnivore. I don't know. We know all these things, right? There's nothing new in Snowden.
Just like WikiLeaks.
He's a branch of WikiLeaks, right?
Well, there's nothing new in WikiLeaks. No great revelations.
He's a branch of Cass Sunstein.
Yeah.
He's the branch of cognitive
By the way, that Sunstein really needs more attention. That guy is anyway, go ahead.
Well, now his wife is going to be the UN ambassador, right, if she gets through, right? But we'll talk about them in a minute if we have time. But here's the big thing. There's some fake poll, I think fake, but maybe it's true, that Obama lost 18% of his youth support in the 2 weeks after Snowden comes on the scene. And then Snowden comes on the scene saying, you people meeting at the G8, the British and the U.S. are tapping your phones and reading your emails, so they all freak out.
Shocker.
Now we have that the U.S. taps the phones and reads the emails of everybody in Europe every day, every email, and on and on. Again, this is all Echelon. This has actually been known since 1999 or thereabouts, under Clinton already, not even Bush. But what Snowden does is he takes all this stuff, he rolls it up in a ball, he puts a new wrapper on it, and he says, this is now the responsibility of Obama, which is true, except that the goal of this is nothing good. The goal of this is it's a limited hangout operation. It's very similar to Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers, and Assange and his document dumps, which all they're all covert operations. And so is Snowden. And in this case, it's to weaken Obama, to weaken him with his domestic base, which is very sensitive to this stuff about spying and privacy. And also now he's got the Germans are freaked out, Merkel is freaked out. So now we can imagine the next meeting of Obama with Cameron and Hollande, where they say, if you want to get back to normal relations, and if you want us to drop this NSA stuff, you attack Syria now.
That's an interesting lever. Yeah. Let me say one thing. It's well known that MI6, probably GCHQ, and the CIA swap tapping information constantly.
No, it's real time in both directions, allegedly, right? There's an umbilical cord, whether it's fiber optics or coaxial cable, whatever it is. Right. It goes from Fort Meade, Maryland, to GCHQ Cheltenham, and in theory, perfide Albion, but in theory, whatever one side knows, the other side knows.
I'm rather surprised at the German anger over this. They can't be that stupid.
Oh, because they have Datenschutz, right? All this stuff. It's a petty bourgeois obsession. When you look at it, actually, you'd have to say a lot of people who didn't seem to be very upset about 9/11, fraud, the Iraq War, the Afghan War, bombing Libya, death squads in Syria, they get upset about their own privacy. All right, I think this is a somewhat limited view. Naturally, we condemn spying, wiretapping. We want the Constitution. We don't want any of this stuff. But the main issue confronting the world right now is not your privacy. The main issue is stopping the attack on Syria. Because, obviously, if you have an attack on Syria, you can forget your civil liberties. You can forget your privacy. You can forget a lot of things. Because that's a general war in the Middle East right away. And you're really engaging Russia. China is now accusing the death squads of Syria of helping the rebels in Chinese Turkestan, right, in Xinjiang province. So there's a Chinese angle of hostility against that Syrian death squad center, which would become a world center of terrorism like we've never seen.
Yeah, we'll go right through the break, Webster. We want to get more on the table here. Go ahead.
Okay, so
Snowden. The world's watching this man. Where is he going to go? Asylum.
I'll give you five points to think about. These are my 5 points. How do you tell a CIA or other covert operation? How do you tell a triple agent? First of all, he's an immediate media darling, right? Ellsberg had all the papers published.
He waltzed on center stage through The Guardian, on the Washington Post, on the Times. Come on, CNN. He didn't come up through our ranks. He started out the top of the MSM.
Anybody who's ever tried to do something the establishment didn't want knows that this is not how you get treated. Right? You don't become 1/3 of every hour on CNN.
He was a contract employee, and as I read the story, he was really only on the job for, 90 days before he defected,
something
so to
like
speak?
That. Again, let me develop my 5 points, because then people can remember them systematically, because it's important to learn the points, and then you can apply them.
Okay, number one, repeat number one.
Instant media darling.
Right.
Of controlled media. Okay?
MSM media darling, okay.
MSM. Second is, they got nothing new to tell. The Pentagon Papers, if you were reading Le Monde, there's nothing new in the Pentagon Papers. You knew it all. If you looked at the world, the stuff that Assange had, that massacre where he had the film, the massacre was known, the number of dead was known, the one thing that was not available was the film, so Assange had the film. But in this case with Snowden, again, what Snowden is telling you is echelon, trailblazer, carnivore, warrantless wiretapping. This is what Comey and Ashcroft were fighting Cheney and Rove about, right? Whether you could continue with warrantless wiretapping, and that's almost 10 years ago. So this is not new. On the other side of the same coin, though, third point, they don't tell you anything about the main covert operations of the age. The things that are really interesting, you really want to know, they don't tell you. Nothing about the JFK assassination in the Pentagon Papers. Assange and Snowden have nothing about 9/11. They have nothing about the Arab Spring. They have nothing about dirty operations against Libya, Syria, Iran. They don't have any of that. And there's no U.S., British, or Israeli politician who is damaged in the least by this stuff. I saw one of Hillary Clinton's top advisors at the end of 2011 on one of the European cable stations, and he said, this is really not a problem for us, what Assange has put out, because everything Assange shows proves that the State Department does good. We're just doing good all around the world, and that's what's in these papers, and that's about correct. So nothing new, nothing about 9/11, nothing you didn't know, and nothing about what you really want to know. Okay, so that's 3. The fourth one is very important for this Snowden, the Damascus Road conversion. Right, this is very strong with Ellsberg. Ellsberg was a nuclear planner. He was a strangelove who then went to Vietnam. He worked for Ed Lansdale of the CIA. He was part of Operation Phoenix, which was massive assassinations of anybody who could read and write, because they were sure to be communists. So he's got blood all over him. Then he comes back and he has Damascus Road conversion. He says, I've got to do something to stop the war, right? Nobody can believe this. Now, we look at Snowden. In 2004, he wanted to join the Special Forces, according to published accounts. There's even a quote where he said, I felt it was my responsibility as a free man to go to Iraq and help people to be free. In other words, he wanted to kill Iraqis to make them free. That's 2004. Then we have, through this Ars Technica site and the Washington Post, that he, in 2009, said, leakers should be shot. Leakers should be executed. And he talked, I'm afraid, about genital mutilation of leakers in the process. So he's a warmonger and an enemy of WikiLeaks in 2009. Interestingly enough, so and he wants secrecy, and then he flips. And some people say, well, that's his cover. I'm sorry, that's not his cover. It goes back way too far. Right? It's just too much. It's the real Snowden is the one you see between 2009 and 2004, 2009. And then the fifth point is that these operations prepare more covert operations, right? Pentagon Papers clearly prepare Watergate, weakening of the presidency permanently. The Assange and WikiLeaks, that prepares the Arab Spring, right? Because who's targeted? Most of the people targeted are gone now, right? Ben Ali, Berlusconi, Mubarak, Gaddafi, Assad is under siege. Karzai Maliki also under siege. Kirchner hanging on in Argentina. But you get the idea, right? That the people that get roughed up are the ones the CIA wants to be weakened. And now with Snowden, what's the covert op? Well, the covert op is the attack on Syria, right? To make that easier, to cut Obama's domestic and foreign base of support so that he'll have no choice but to, threaten him with impeachment behind the scenes, and then he'll have to go for it. But then there's more, right? You can see that Snowden was there to make trouble between the U.S. and China, to make trouble between the U.S. and Russia. Now, when you look at Putin's response, Putin basically says, I don't want any part of this, right? He says it's like shearing a pig. Lots of squealing, no result, which is true. So he basically said, you can stay here, but stop being an agent provocateur, because that's what you are. Right?
The translation, Webster, was weird. I don't know if it was an inaccurate translation. He said, you can stay here as long as you agree to stop harming the U.S.,
Stop publishing your garbage, right?
Yeah.
Stop doing, because you can't turn your foreign policy over to this guy because he's too smelly. And he's not the only one. The Chinese wanted him out, clear. Maduro of Venezuela on the television the other day said, I think he's manipulated. And today, on Russia Today, which has been a citadel of pro-Snowden as well as pro-Assange sentiment, they had a guy called Boys, B-O-Y-S, from King's College London. He said, I wonder who's actually pulling Snowden's strings. Well, if he's merged with Assange, you can look at the godfather of WikiLeaks, who is Cass Sunstein, and maybe Samantha Power over there in the White House. So that's an operation. And I think it's important that this operation is being defeated, because it's time for the CIA to start losing on these things. Not that every damn left liberal and every damn libertarian is like a Pavlovian dog, and they're going to salivate as soon as you trot out some figure like this who spouts a few cliches about, consent of the governed, and because the main thing is these are people trying to bring on a war.
Yeah, you're right.
Now, the other point that I wanted to make was, what's the way out with Egypt, right? And how does this get us back to Egypt? Because it certainly does. Here's the very interesting thing. There was a meeting, a kind of a rally, on June 15th in Cairo, I guess, which was attended by President Morsi. And there were also a whole bunch of extreme Sunni clerics, all right? And they're calling for a holy war against Assad in Syria.
Yeah, I reported on that last night. I know.
This is really something. Now, the Irish Times, is that what you had? The Irish Times article says that when Morsi went to this rally of the Egyptian crazies, that this was the last straw for the army. This was now more than 2 weeks ago, almost 3 weeks ago.
That's right. The army said we want nothing to do with anything except protecting Egypt. For hell with this.
Yeah, that's it. Morsi went to this rally and said, we have to have a holy war against Syria, being Assad. And it meant that the Egyptian army was going to be sent
that's right.
to do the dirty work of the imperialists in Syria. Now this may be an absolutely critical
and in London and in Washington and in Paris, etc.
But so it was, as you say, then the army then replied, not directly, but just saying, our only task is to defend the borders of this country, because these were the things where Mubarak was better. Because Mubarak, for example, remember Bush the younger went to Mubarak and he said, we want Egyptian troops in Afghanistan, and the answer was no. And we want Egyptian troops in Iraq, and the answer was no. And we want a U.S. base in Egypt, no. We want you to have a military alliance active with Israel, no. Right? We want you under our nuclear umbrella, no, we don't want it, and on and on. So the idea, though, is in the army, who would respond to this lunatic idea that the Egyptian army should go and fight against the Syrian army. Remember, this was once one country. This was the United Arab Republic under Nasser, right, in the 60s and 70s.
That's right.
There was something called the United Arab Republic, and that was Egypt
yep.
and Syria. Yep. It was not actually, united as close as you might think, but still one country. So I'm wondering now, are there Nasserist colonels? In other words, when Morsi made this obscene proposal, where did the backlash occur? Was it at the top level? This guy, General Sisi, I don't know, if there ever was a yes man, it might be General Sisi.
I would say probably it, yeah.
CC, he only says CC, right? He never says no. Now
Or
that guy he's a product of training in the U.S. and Britain. I think he's been to the, the Leavenworth Staff College or something like this. So that may not be so great. But I'm wondering, but he's also younger, so he may be better. I don't know. I'm only kidding now with the Sisi. But the Nasserist colonels, the middle rank officers who were disgusted by the imperialist sellouts of the top officers, they may be gaining in power because that's the tradition of Egypt. So I'm wondering, is it the case that the desperate bid of the imperialists to somehow pull their chestnuts out of the fire in Syria, where the terrorist armies are being
routed
hard, that may be the key to the fall of Morsi, that he went too far and he tried to engineer a Syrian.
No, the Holy War story was just a knockout punch. That was really amazing to read.
But again, the Holy War meaning that the Egyptian army is sent overseas,
right, and invading another country. I mean, this is
an Arab country, a fraternal, practically the same country.
Yep.
All right. So then there's that. But now let's also look at the political side. In the presidential elections last year, the candidates that came in, the win, place, and show were Morsi came in first. Let's look at the first round. Morsi came in with 25% of the votes or so. Second was the army candidate, Shafiq, I think his name was, a colorless hack. But third, and only 700,000 votes behind the army candidate, Shafiq, is Hamdeen Sabbahi. And this is the guy that I think is the most promising. So if Morsi is now out and the army is pledging not to be in politics, there's a certain logic that pushes us towards Hamdeen Sabbahi. Notice that you have not heard the name Hamdeen Sabbahi from any U.S. or English language or really any other broadcasting, even though he's the number 3 guy, clearly, and he brings most of the force to this National Salvation Front, right? You're going to hear all about El-Baradei. I'm sorry, El-Baradei is a Western puppet.
He's a hack.
He's a hack. He's a Western puppet. He's not acceptable. The masses don't like him. But now let's look at Sabbahi. Sabbahi is the top secular opponent of Mubarak, right? Most of the opponents of Mubarak were the Muslim Brotherhood or Salafists or Al-Qaeda, Zawahiri or somebody like this. Hamdeen Sabbahi, no, he's secular. He's a Nasserist. He was arrested by Mubarak in 2003 because Sabbahi was organizing demonstrations against the Iraq War that were an embarrassment to the U.S. and to Mubarak. He, as I said, he wants it's a 10% tax if you have a fortune of over 50 million Egyptian pounds, and I believe the Egyptian pound is about $7 to $1. So if you have more than like $7 million, you should pay a one-time Tahrir tax, 10% tax on your assets to level the playing field after all the corruption of the Mubarak era. In the campaign last year, Hamdeen Sabbahi ran on a platform of no to the Islamists, in other words, no to the Muslim Brotherhood, and no to the IMF. So no to the Islamists, no to the neoliberals, no to the Brotherhood, no to the IMF and the market fetishists. And then he has a program where he says every Egyptian deserves, and see if this reminds you of something even from this country once upon a time. Every Egyptian deserves housing, health care, food, free education, jobs, social insurance, a fair wage, and a clean environment.
Great society?
Well, it's practically the FDR.
Oh, FDR's, sure.
It's Franklin D. Roosevelt's Economic Bill of Rights of January 1944, more or less. So this is, I think, a distinguished program, and I would urge people to talk this guy up, right? Hamdeen Sabbahi, because this is obviously the best.
Spell his last name.
It goes two ways, right? Because of the problems of transliterating from a different alphabet, right? There are different variations, but it's either Sabbahi,
Sabbahi,
or
all right.
Sabahi.
Well, it sounds pretty damn close either way, doesn't it?
He's Hamdeen Sabbahi.
Yeah, all right.
And this is Democratic Nasserist.
Well, he's rolling out an FDR time-worn, can't lose. I mean, that appeals to everybody. Sure.
It's a classic. And again, the Nasserist combination is anti-imperialism and economic development. That is, they build the Aswan High Dam and modernize the country. Right? Modern Egypt is based on that dam.
Infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. And above all, in a country like this, housing. Right? What do they lack? They need electricity reliably 24 hours a day. They need clean water. They need massive public housing. And then they need to solve this constant food debt. Right? The food deficit is that this is the biggest wheat importer in the world. When you have the Nile, you have one Nile. You can easily have two Niles. You could develop 20 million acres of new arable agricultural land by diverting part of the Nile slightly over to the west, and that would give you an entire, a second Nile. You could have a second.
Is that much water?
Yeah, sure. And then there's also there's aquifers underneath, as Gaddafi found.
Yeah.
In the last days of Mubarak, there was a guy called Ibrahim Kamel who talked about these things. He was a wealthy businessman. He had other things going on which were not that great.
Wrap it up. 30 seconds. We're late.
All right. So there it is. So I urge everybody talk up Hamdeen Sabbahi. Right. You can spread the word on this. And the other thing is that Ed Snowden is a fraud. Ed Snowden is a triple agent. Right. He seems to be on the bottom. He's NSA, CIA. Fine. Then he becomes whistleblower, right, traitor, whatever he is. But then ultimately he's loyal to Langley. He's doing a job for the U.S. intelligence community, which is why Putin, Maduro, Correa, and Evo Morales, they don't really trust him. Otherwise, they would have taken him to Latin America. They don't trust him.
All right.
And they're right.
Very good. Excellent hour, Webster. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Maybe we'll talk toward the end of the month here if we need to.
Let's see how fast events go.
Okay. Be well. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Night.